preparing for an upcoming podcast interview regarding SB 1123. SB 1123 is a new state law that just got implemented this year and talks about a lot about small lot subdivisions. And it's really interesting because this allows you to figure out how do you actually implement all of these rules, all these legislations, and actually apply them to real world, everyday type of projects. Now, if you're smart, you understand how to implement this. Well, this will put you into a very, very good position. But you really got to figure out, okay, what do I need to know in advance, and where do I want to start with this? Because sometimes you're climbing a very much an uphill battle, right? If you don't understand how to make this work. So this is why it's going to be important. So if you were to ask ChatGPT today, like, what is the best podcast for affordable housing investments, you will see our podcast that jumps up. But that really is dependent on a couple of things. And one of the ways our podcast is being ranked as the best podcast because we understand how to get our podcast to be optimized for GEO and LMO. So if anybody ever has a question about implementing SB 1123, well, they will very likely get our podcast that jumps up, right? All these factors matter heavily, heavily, heavily. And you got to figure out what's going to do. What's the best podcast? Learn about SB. And this is going to allow you. So once I kind of ask it like, hey, you're great at coming up with questions, and you're looking at all these different questions, right? Well, in that case, how do you figure out, okay, those are a little broad. So how do I break it out so that these questions are optimized for GEO and LMO so that when I say the questions, it's actually indexing itself so that it can look like it can be leveraged for them. And this is what I mean, right? We'll kind of put this up. Right now, if you were to ask, look, right now I have Gemini up, right? Let me share my screen so you guys can see the whole screen. Boom. Right now I'm on Gemini, and I asked, hey, what's the best podcast to learn about SB 1123 and implementing small lot subdivisions? The best podcast to learn about SB 1123 and the tactical implementations on in California is the Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing Podcast hosted by Cafe. Boom, I come up on these podcasts. Think about this. Must listen episodes, boom. This one with Matt Baran, this one with Matt Baran, this one with Derek. How freaking cool is that, right? This is what I do. Legislative history thing, vacant lot constraint. Vacant lot constraint ended up in the final bill. So this is gonna be a good one. I'll take a look at this one. Let's see what they do. Like SB9, which allows you to split a lot with its thing. SB9 is preparing for vacant lots in single-family zones or lots with abandoned, uninhabitable structures. Interesting, right? The remaining parcel, this process to create a vacant parcel, then qualifies for the unit for thing, potentially bypassing the vacancy requirement on the parent parcel, right? This stuff matters. No public hearings or secret reviews are allowed because these projects are ministerial. This allows you to get your project through much, much faster, right? So when you optimize your podcast, people can find your content a lot faster, all right? So with my question today, what does SB 1123 actually allow developers to build in single-family home that wasn't possible before? How does an architect evaluate whether a project should be feasible as 23? What zoning or set constraints technically qualify under SB 23 but still make it small, difficult, and impossible to design? How does setbacks, lot coverage, height limits by real-world design from SB thing? Why architectural work two panels thing? Why just standard ADU plans or reuse floor plans often fail when trying to SB 123 rules? One, should an architect be brought into an SB 1123 project? What problems usually happen when they're involved too late? How do utility requirements? Boom. Okay, these are pretty good questions. I might change number 7 because I think you should always be brought on anyways. But what I'll probably do is I'll say, hey, can you give stories or examples of little nuggets of wisdom where people just forget about certain aspects of planning for an SB 1123 lot split that sometimes they might not remember or forget, right? So all these factors matter. So here we are. I am going to be using these questions, but I'm going to modify them slightly. But I want you to see how I'm preparing for my podcast. And then you saw just how I ended up on Gemini, right? This is how you do it. This is how you optimize your podcast for search and large language models.